Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night. Wherever you are, whatever time you're listening, this is the Pinecone Comics Club podcast. We could not be happier today to bring you an interview that we were lucky enough to conduct with none other than J.M. DeMatteis. We got J.M. on the Cone phone and asked him about his work, past, present, and future. And it seems to us the comic industry couldn't have a much nicer guy, nor could it have a much more talented fella. You tell me if this is accurate. What they actually have you credited as your first work on Comic TV is in 1975, a book and record set of Conan the Barbarian. Does that ring a bell?
Well, that's accurate and inaccurate at the same time.
Is it?
The book and record thing was written by Len Wein. Okay? It was written by Len Wein, drawn by Neil Adams. And 5 years later, in 1980, when I took over Conan, they had that story and they wanted to insert it into the comic and into continuity. So I sort of wrote over Len's original story. But no, in 1975, I wasn't working in comics, so that's completely incorrect.
Gotcha. Oh, okay. Well, now we know. That's funny. So you wrote over...
Yeah, I sort of added to Len's story and, added captions and dialogue and whatever to make it fit more into the comic book continuity, because that was just a little standalone story.
Interesting.
Yeah. But that was, 19... I don't even think the book and record thing was done in 1975. I thought it was more recent than that, but who knows?
Who knows?
I have no idea.
About?
I started for the DC anthology comics. That was my real start in comics, and that was like in the late 70s.
Let's see.
It wasn't like in the late 70s. It was in the late 70s.
What about if I said Weird War Tales?
Yes.
Yeah.
My first stories I sold were to House of Mystery and Weird War Tales. Probably the first few. Very first story was sold to House of Mystery. Paul Levitz was the editor. And it was a story with the immortal title, "The Lady Killer Craves Blood." It wasn't the first story that saw print. Weird War Tales was also a blood story, but they were horror comics, so they always had that blood in the title, whatever. It's called The Blood Boat. It was a World War II vampire on a PT boat story. How's that?
That's perfect. Yeah.
That was actually the first story of mine, the comic book story that saw print.
I was going to ask you, and then the second one was the House of Mystery, issue 270. It looks like, and then if this is accurate, in 1979, All Out War issue number 1. Does that ring a bell?
I did. I know that I did a story for that comic book. I don't know. The stories didn't come out like in the order that I wrote them. You know what I mean? So they came out in different orders.
Right.
But I know, all that. I wrote a ton of stuff for Weird War Tales and House of Mystery and House of Secrets, and I think that was the only straight war comic I ever did. Thank God, because I really don't like war comics. Although as a little kid, I loved Sergeant Fury. I really don't know why, but I totally adored it. I hate war stories.
I was going to ask about that because in this time period, that was a common war comics were a common thing. Today, you almost can't find them, right?
Yeah. Well, I think, and even then the tone was, we want them to be anti-war, blah, 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 blah. But, when you're writing a war story, it's hard not to glorify war, no matter how you do it. Weird War Tales, because they were essentially horror stories where the war setting was different. It didn't feel like in any way, shape, or form it was the glorification of war. Plus, you're a new writer starting out. You're going to sell to whatever you can sell to.
Right. And
do your best to do a story that meets their needs and also doesn't violate your own beliefs, So that's why I did classic stories like The Blood Boat. But they were fun little stories in a lot of ways. And when I said it, a vampire in a PT boat. Well, there's a movie, really, when you think about it.
Oh yeah.
Even that first silly story, the lady killer craves blood. The idea was it was not long after the Son of Sam killings in New York, and the idea was that there was a Son of Sam-like killer who had killed this woman. except that her husband was a vampire who goes off hunting the serial killer. And really, that's not a bad pitch, a vampire hunting a serial killer. There's a movie too, you know?
Yeah.
So the thing was, they were all these little 5, 6, 7, at most 8-page stories. And so you had to cram a lot of story into a little bit of space. And it was a great way to learn. It was a really great way to learn. Now, when we live in a world where a lot of times you'll see in 6 issues, maybe 2 issues worth of story if you're lucky.
Yeah.
You know, and those, you know, you really, and it was a great way to learn. You know, that you had to pack as much story and characterization as you could in 5 to 8 pages. You know, the first time I think I did a full-length story, I did like a 22-page Weird War Tales story, and that was like, boy, talk about luxury. I had 22 whole pages to tell a story. It was amazing.
I was going to ask about that too, because once in a while they'll, for this, you know, kind of a throwback approach, they'll do an anthology issue nowadays,
right.
But it never seems to get a lot of traction. Although I think they're just brilliant because, you know, you really are. It forces a creative team, right, to just really do their best if they've only got 8 pages to shine.
And the anthology format is just a great format. I mean, Twilight Zone remains probably my favorite television series of all time. And there you have you have a theme, you have an idea, you have an attitude, you have a feeling, but a different story every week. And it's a shame. I think the comic fans today, for the most part, are just too invested in the universes and the continuity to even want to read an anthology comic with superheroes in it. They want more, I think. But even with the superheroes back then, when I was starting out, and again, it was a great way to learn. You know, World's Finest, Detective Comics, right. All those comics had multiple features in them.
Right.
So I was writing, you know, Hawkman stories at 8 pages a pop, and Red Tornado stories, or Black Lightning, or whatever it was that they asked me to write. I think my first published, I was actually just writing about this in my blog the other day because of the whole Batman anniversary thing.
Right.
I think my first published in a comic book superhero story was an 8-page Batman story.
Creatures of the Night, exclamation point?
That's the one, although it was preceded, which is what I did my whole history with Batman on my blog the other day. And the first thing I ever did was a Batman coloring book, which even preceded the story in Detective Comics. So that was pretty funny. You know, but again, when you're starting out, it's like, hey, you want to write a Batman coloring book? Yes, and you're going to pay me to do it? That's fantastic. Of course I'll write that, you know. And you learn something every time. And that was the thing in the beginning, whether it was, okay, well, I don't really like war stories, and I'm not that big a horror fan, really, but okay, I'll figure out a way to make this work, and I will learn something in the process. And writing 8-page stories, you know, you're starting out, you're thinking, no, I want to write my big epic. And well, you don't have the skill to write your big epic, you know. Right. So learn your craft in this nice little way and really learn how to write a story with a beginning and a middle and an end and characterization and arcs, and do it in 8 pages. And if you can do it in 8 pages, then maybe you'll be able to do it in 15 pages, and maybe you'll be able to do it in 20 pages, and then maybe you'll be able to write a multi-part story. But you have to really learn your stuff. And that's one thing that's really not out there in the same way anymore, or at all in comics, a place for new writers to go, you know, new writers that have talent and show promise, to go and basically just learn the craft before you're thrown into the deep end.
Right.
You know, and that's a shame. That's one of the reasons why in recent years I haven't done them half as much as I've wanted to, but I've done these writing workshops, a place to share what I've learned over the years with new, hungry, creative young writers. And it's been really, when I get to do them, it's really, really fun.
If you were the king of comics, or you were the czar of comic books, would you reinstitute the anthology books?
Well, probably, you know, if I was the czar of comic books, didn't have to worry about making money and profits,
yeah, right.
I think that's the problem. Is, you know, if they put them out there, they don't make money, and so I'm sure there are a lot of people sitting behind desks at Marvel and DC who would love to see that. But then you'd have to deal with the realities of the market. But there has to be some way, because now, well, you know, the whole landscape is different, because now you've got people coming in who are novelists and screenwriters and TV writers,
right?
And then and it seems like the only way for someone new to break in who's not there is you have to go off and do your own indie comic and get noticed,
right?
but even there, where do you learn your craft? You just going to go off and just write some 6-part brand new thing from the ground up without anyone teaching you how to do it? Because there's a lot to learn. It's a unique, interesting, and weird little art form that we have with very unique and weird little interesting rules that don't apply anywhere else. You know, so it was really, for me, it was great. I would go home and write these stories. I didn't even care if they were being printed. Honest to God, it was like, they're giving me some money, and then I'm going to turn in the script, and this editor's going to sit down with me, and he's going to teach me something, and I'm going to learn. And that's really what I cared about.
Now tell me about that process, because you, in these days, 1980, you were writing from home, right? You presumably.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you'd get face to face with an editor, or would you just?
Yeah, well, I lived in New York City in those days, so I could go up to D.C. and sit down with Paul Levitz or Jack Harris or Len Wein, and we'd do it face to face. Sometimes I'd sit and actually edit the script while you were sitting in the room and go, "Oh, this doesn't work. What should we do here?" You know, and it was fantastic. It was a great way to learn. You know, I've talked about this in my writing classes. I still have when I first wrote to DC, I have these letters that Paul Levitz wrote to me in response, and the very, very first letter that he sent back, I sent in some plot ideas for I guess the House of Mystery, and he tore apart my stories. He criticized my typing. You know what I mean? We were typing in those days. There were no computers, you know. But at the bottom of the letter, it said, "Please feel free to submit again." And so my brain went, "Oh, that's all I saw."
Right.
It was like, I don't care if he hated it. He's saying submit again. So you go back and you write some more ideas. And then he criticizes us. And finally, the third time or fourth time around, I went up to the office and we sat down face to face and I pitched him a bunch of ideas. And one of them resonated, and he said, "Okay, here's what you have to do. You got to go home and do this, 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 and this, and use splash page here, and be clear about this." And I went home and I wrote that, and I took that in, and he went over the script, and he told me what I did wrong, and then I got it right, and he bought it, and it was like, oh my God, he's buying this script. This is fantastic. And one of the great memories, great moments of my entire career was Paul sitting there in whatever it was, maybe December of 1977 or something, shaking my hand and saying, "Welcome to the business." And It was just like, what a great moment. Now, what happened was I sold them stories for about 6 months, and then there was the infamous DC implosion. When DC, cut the whole line back, and everybody who was non-essential was basically thrown overboard, including me. And then there was a period of almost a year, I think, or maybe 8 or 9 months, where I didn't have any work from anybody. And then I think it was really for me in about 1979 when I started to get regular work, and it's been a pretty regular thing in my life ever since.
Okay.
And happily has opened up many other doors in other media, and it's been a great gig and a fun ride.
Were you, say in 1980, were you earning your living in comics? Like did you have a day job?
By 1980, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that. Okay.
Yeah. Now, I look back at now what the page rates were and whatever, but it was a different world.
Sure.
And it's before your kids are older and you don't have mortgage and you don't have this and you don't have that. But as I found as I evolved, the business evolved and the rates went up and royalties came in and you learn, hey, you can make a pretty good living doing this stuff. Not a bad deal, because nobody. Maybe in the 90s people got it, when the sales were through the roof and their hologram covers and giant royalties. Yeah. Maybe there were some guys in the 90s who got into comics to make money.
Sure.
But the vast majority of people that get into comics, they don't get in it for the money. They get in it for the love. And then if you're lucky enough, it turns into a career and you actually make a living. And it's allowed me to support my family in a very nice way over the years. And I'm very grateful. But that's not why we got in it. We got in it because we loved it.
Now, you would describe yourself as a comic book fan.
Yes, absolutely.
Beautiful thing. I wanted to ask this one. It looks like a book called Time Warp, #2. You had a story published, and it was drawn, if this info is to be believed, by Gil Kane.
Yes.
Did you? Was that pretty fantastic, or were there any early memories of kind of being starstruck where
it was, when I look back, I'm more amazed now than I was then. I think then I was probably amazed by the whole thing, that I was doing it at all, and then, But I look back now. Time Warp was the book I think that opened things up after the DC implosion. I remember I got a call from, I think it was Mike Barr, who was Jack Harris's assistant or something at the time, and they were doing Time Warp, and they needed stories, and they remembered me from 8 or 9 months before, or Paul Levitz recommended me, whatever it was, and that's what opened the door for me at DC again. And so Time Warp, Gil Kane. I look at those early days. I had Steve Ditko used to draw for those anthology comics.
Yeah.
He drew a couple of Time Warp stories that I did. Steve Ditko, for God's sake, and illustrated a truly horrible Legion of Superhero story that I wrote. Not horrible was not him. The story was horrible, not the art. Don Heck drew some Aquaman stories that I did. I worked with Dick Giordano on Aquaman. Yep. When I went to Marvel, I worked with John Buscema and Gene Colan, and I was like, all these guys who were my heroes as a kid. I mean, Gil Kane next to Jack Kirby was my, that was it when it came to comic book artists. So, and then I got to work with Gil Kane on Conan for a short period of time too. Now I look back, it was all early in my career, and I look at those stories, and a lot of times I just cringe. It's like, oh my God, if only I could have worked with these guys a few years later when I knew what the hell I was doing, It's like years later when I finally got to work with John Romita Sr., who was one of my comic book gods as well. But by that point, I knew what I was doing, and it was a really good story, and he did a beautiful job, and working with him was just one of the highlights of my career, But in the early days, that I was working with these guys who were legends, and they were drawing, stories for Time Warp. Oh, wow, that's great. Amazing.
It looks like Captain America was the first book that you were writing on month after month for a while. Does that sound about right?
No, actually, that seems wrong. I think I did my first regular gig at Marvel. I did some fill-ins and things, but my first regular gig was Conan.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which again was, I was a huge fan of the Roy Thomas, Barry Smith Conan, and I followed it after that and still enjoyed it. But not a book that I was necessarily suited for. But when you're starting out and they say, "Do you want to write Conan?" you say, "Absolutely." Right. And there I was, this newbie writer following Roy Thomas, one of the gods of comics, especially in those days,
Yeah.
who had just had this legendary run on Conan and left, and had given it to me. And I sat and I sweated. Oh God, did I sweat over those scripts? And I look back, some of it's okay, and some of it's not so okay. But I did the best that I could at the time, and I was learning, and I was working with John Buscema first, and then with Gil Kane. I mean, unbelievable. I actually scared John Buscema off the book. I think I was responsible for that. He did not like what I was doing. And one day, and I so admired him. I mean, the Stan Lee, John Buscema Silver Surfer stuff is some of my favorite comics of all time.
Yeah.
And I think the editor mentioned that he had some problems with the story, so I called him up. Very intimidated. And he explains, what he likes in a Conan story, what he doesn't like in a Conan story, what I did wrong. So I tailor the next plot exactly to everything he said, and he draws it, and then he left the book. Like, oh man, I just scared away John Buscema. It's terrible, But I think he probably went off to do Savage Sword of Conan in the black and white or something,
Right.
And then they said, oh well, they were replacing him with Gil Kane, so how long are you going to cry over that one? If the next thing is Gil Kane. And I still remember the first Gil Kane issue because it was just so beautiful. There was a sequence at the beginning where Conan, he's wandering through the snow somewhere, and this massive polar bear shows up, and there's a battle between Conan and the polar bear, done as only Gil Kane could do it, and it was just amazing. I could not believe my luck that I was getting to work with him, But again, I'd love to go back in time and rewrite all of those stories.
Really?
So that they were worthy of these amazing artists that I was working with.
Here's an embarrassing question. You don't have to answer, but when you wake up at night in a cold sweat, thinking of a piece of work that's kind of embarrassing to you, what is it?
God, that's a good. Here's the thing I've learned over the years, which is maybe why I won't want to single out something. Several come to mind, but because sometimes I'm the worst judge of my own work, or maybe my judgment is accurate, but I find time and again I go to conventions and someone comes up to me with some issue of something that I've always been like, that I've always found cringeworthy, and they go, God, I read this when I was 12, and this is one of my favorite comic books of all time.
Right.
And it meant so much to me. And I love it. Would you please sign it for me? And I'm like, oh, my God. So it doesn't really matter what I think, does it? You know what I mean? because somewhere someone read that story and really enjoyed it, you know. And so I'm sure there are other people who read it and rolled their eyes and then put it in the shredder. But I find time and again I'm always astonished when someone comes along and says, I love that story. You know what was so great about that? Let me tell you what was great about that. And I go, you know, I have my feelings about it, but who am I to argue with that? So the only reason I don't want to single anything out, because I don't want someone out there who's considers such and such a story their favorite and have me knock it, you know, and destroy their enjoyment of that story because I said something negative about it, you know.
That makes good sense. I was. Well, then what about Captain America? How was your stint on Captain America?
I had a great time on Captain America. You know, in those days, I always found it would take me 3 or 5 or 6 issues to kind of find my footing. But once I did, well, first of all, for the first part of the run, I was working with Mike Zeck, and it was just a character that I clicked with. You know, I always liked Captain America. I find as a writer, a lot of times there are characters that you may like as a reader, but then you start to write them and you love them, you know, because you begin to, you know, you crack open their skulls and you get into their heads and their hearts, and suddenly you connect with them in a way that you never did as a reader. And I found it was that way with Captain America. Again, I'd always enjoyed the character, and there were you know, runs that I really, really loved, whether it was Steve Englehart or Stern and Byrne or Stan and Jack or whatever, you know. Right. But when I wrote the character, I really, really connected with the character. And so that I was on that book for 3 or 3.5 years. First with Zeck and then with Paul Neary. And until the end, which was sort of a bitter end, it was really a lot of fun. And what I've found really interesting, for years, no one ever mentioned my run on Captain America to me whatsoever. And then maybe 4 or 5 years ago, all of a sudden, people started coming up with the Captain America run, and then and every year it seems to get more and more. And people, I don't know whether people are rediscovering it or the people that were reading it then are coming out of the woodwork. But all of a sudden, I'm getting more appreciation for that run now than I did when I was writing it, which is really interesting. But I had a great time on that, and then it's a fairly famous or infamous story at the end, but I'll tell the short version. Is that I had done this really, really year-long, massive story, final battle between Cap and the Red Skull. By the end of it, almost everyone Captain America loves has almost been killed. He saved them by the skin of their teeth and his teeth. Cap has been aged. The Red Skull dies in battle with him, and what I realized was here's a character that's been doing this for, at that point, something like 40 years. He's been involved in trying to solve things through violence, and he sees after this battle with the Red Skull that, you know, 40 years, it's the same thing looping over and over again, and he's tired of it. He's disgusted with it. And the end of our big double-sized Captain America 300 was basically Captain America saying, once he's restored to youth again, that there's got to be another way to be, there's got to be another way to live, and there's got to be another way to make a difference in the world. So he turns his back on violence and goes off to seek another way, the result of which is that basically both the heroes and the villains of the Marvel Universe turn against him because he's doing something outrageous that in essence brings into question everything that they do every day, you know. The story was, as planned, was going to evolve to a point where I had Nomad, who was the Bucky of the 50s in the book, right, and he was going to flip out and in the end assassinate Captain America. And my plan after that was to then replace Cap with, my first thought was Sam Wilson, the Falcon, and then I decided on a Native American character that I had in the book called Black Crow, so we were going to have a Native American Captain America after that. So I took this whole epic idea to my editor, Mark Gruenwald. He approved it. I wrote a double-sized Captain America 300, and then Jim Shooter, at the time, you know, he's the custodian of the Marvel Universe, it was his right, decided he didn't want this story. He didn't think that this fit the character. I would disagree with that, but he had every right to feel that way. He was the custodian of the universe. And I could also see when you have one of your biggest icons questioning the very thing that all of your characters in your universe are doing month after month, that maybe you want to back away from it a little bit. Whatever, I don't know what Jim's reasoning was at the time, but for whatever reason he didn't like it, and I left the book in a huff. They cut our double-sized issue in half. It was significantly rewritten on certain pages and parts, so I took my name off it. And so the run ended badly, but overall I really had a great time. And frankly, even that at the time, I was all up. My feathers were all ruffled. And I look back and I go, you know what? Jim had a job to do. He had a judgment call to make, and that's what you do when you're editor-in-chief. And I have absolutely no hard feelings about it now. Yeah. But I eventually took that story that I was going to do with Captain America and created my own character called Savior 28 and did a series for IDW called The Life and Times of Savior 28, which ultimately I think was better than the Captain America story would have been. But what I find so interesting looking back is, Captain America subsequently did get assassinated.
Yeah, right.
I hear in the book now that Cap has been aged, which is what I did back then, and that they're bringing in the Falcon as Captain America, which is what I considered doing back then. So clearly on that one I was ahead of the curve by about 30 years.
Right, a minute.
So I think had that story been done at the time. It's funny because now everything is about the big event and everything gets publicity and it's all in the New York Times and USA Today and we're Entertainment Weekly. And then that things weren't like that. Then, maybe they were probably even afraid of getting publicity and drawing attention to themselves too much. I don't know, But that's a story that I think would have made a huge impact had we been allowed to do it back then. But and I was imagining some parallel universe somewhere I did the story, And so there's a kid reading that comic book in dimension, X, Y, or Z somewhere, but just not in our universe.
If it's a fascinating point about the change of almost the paradigm shift as far as the event. You raise the point about in those days, you maybe would almost want to stay out of the news, and then of course today you can see events geared at getting that wide media attention.
Yeah, I mean, I look back and I think about I did a story in Spider-Man in the early 90s called The Child Within, which dealt pretty clearly and powerfully with childhood sexual abuse. Well, now I'd be on CNN.
Right.
You know what I mean? And they would be hyping the story to the sky and shining spotlights on it. And then it was just another story. It came out and it was over and that was that. And, it may have been the first, if not the first, certainly one of the very first stories in comics that ever dealt with that. But that's how the landscape has changed. That story went out without a peep. Even back, again, when I was doing Captain America, I had introduced a character named Arnie Roth, who was Cap's childhood best friend, who was gay. Major supporting character in a major Marvel comic book. He was gay. There was no coverage of that. No. Now it would be like, again, you'd be on CNN, you'd be on all these news shows, you'd be in all these magazines talking about it. But not then. It was just another story, and people didn't really wave any flags about it. So it really is fascinating how the landscape has changed.
Going back, I grew up a DC reader, a DC fan, far and away more than a Marvel fan. I didn't realize how prolific you were on Spider-Man. I mean, you wrote more Spider-Man almost than almost anything else, I think.
Someone did a list a couple of years ago, and I think I may have come in at number 2 or 3 in the most Spider-Man stories ever written by anybody. I think I was somehow behind Stan and Howard Mackey, maybe. But I did a lot of Spider-Man. Well, when I was first starting out, I did 3 years on Marvel Team Up, and then came Kraven's Last Hunt, and then I did I think 2.5 years on Spectacular Spider-Man, almost 2 years on Amazing Spider-Man, another 2 years back on Spectacular Spider-Man, plus a variety of miniseries and one-shots and backups and all kinds of things. And even in recent years, I've done little Spider-Man stories here or there. So I've done really, I would think, more Spider-Man than any other single character. The only thing that would probably come close would be the Justice League stuff that Keith Giffen and I did, because for those 5 years, we were really pumping that stuff out.
Right. Well, and I was gonna ask is because although I know I've read a couple a long time ago, not realizing it was your work, but of the Spider-Man stuff. Is your Spider-Man stuff similar to the Justice League stuff in that is it lighthearted and kind of silly? Not at all.
No, every once in a while I would break things up with a goofy story that would fit very nicely in an issue of Justice League, But the stories, for the most part, were very, very emotional / psychological stories that were really, really about peeling the characters' heads apart, As I mentioned, the first story I did for Spectacular SpiderMan was called The Child Within, and it dealt with all these childhood abuse issues for Peter, for Harry, and for this character Vermin. And of course, before that was Kraven's Last Hunt, which in its day was probably the darkest Spider-Man story that had ever been done. And for whatever reason, it keeps coming back into print and has, again, probably more of a life now than it even did when it originally came out. Probably the single most popular story I've ever done. So the Spider-Man stories, like I said, I'd like to lighten it up because Peter Parker has a good sense of humor, and I followed up The Child Within with a completely ridiculous story featuring this character called Frogman. That was, in fact, that I dedicated to Keith and Andy Helfer because it was so in line with our Justice League stories. But for the most part, the Spider-Man stuff was on the darker, edgier side.
Just skipping all over the place here. I don't think I realized you wrote issues 38 through 45 of American Flag.
Right, I forget that too. It's funny because out of the blue, I got someone emailed me about an interview about the American Flag stuff. It's kind of like, I don't really remember. What it was Chaykin had left the book, right. And if you look back, it was a creator-owned book. It was Howard Chaykin's vision. It was pure Chaykin from top to bottom.
Absolutely.
If Chaykin left the book, you canceled the book. You know what I mean?
They called you instead.
And so, after that, Stephen Grant and Mark Badger were working on it for a while, and I think what happened was that I don't think creatively, not on a personal level, but creatively, Badger and Grant weren't seeing eye to eye, and I guess they wanted Badger to stay on the book, so Mark and I were buddies. We'd worked on a few projects together, and he asked me to take over. And American Flag and Chaykin's style and all that is in so many ways the exact opposite of what I do. I read American Flag. I loved it. I thought it was a brilliant book, and it really was groundbreaking for its time. But I couldn't do Chaykin. That wasn't my thing. I was going to look at the characters and try to understand the characters, and Mark and I plotted those stories together, and we did those issues, and we had a lot of fun, but it was sort of like, why we were doing it in the first place, I don't know. I was just having fun because I liked the book and I loved working with Mark, but really they just should have, if Chaykin wasn't doing that book, they just should have pulled the plug.
Right. Next on my list, I really, really liked your Batman story that appeared, I think, in Legends of the Dark Knight. In anticipation of this interview, I just started rereading it, but of course, Batman Going Sane.
Mm-hmm.
Really a clever idea. Is that a book that you remember fondly, or that you prepared for? Is that kind of a Batman story?
That may be, out of my mainstream superhero work, my absolute favorite story that I've ever done. Yeah, I loved that story, and that was one of the. It was an interesting progression with that story because elements of it. I mentioned Kraven's Last Hunt, which is probably the most famous Spider-Man story that I've ever done. But originally, Kraven's Last Hunt started out as a Batman pitch that I pitched to DC in a couple of different forms, and for whatever reason got turned down twice. But in the original pitch was this idea of the Joker thinking he's killed Batman and what the ramifications of that are. And I held on to that idea for quite a few years, and then Archie Goodwin called me up one day and asked me if I wanted to do some Legends of the Dark Knight, and I thought about this story, and the premise being that the Joker thinks he's killed Batman now. The reason for his entire existence is gone, so his mind snaps. Well, if our minds snap, we go crazy.
Right.
His mind snaps, and he goes sane. So it becomes a very tender and tragic love story for the Joker as he assumes this normal everyday identity, while at the same time we follow Batman, who's been completely injured in a way that he's never been injured before, kicked into the river, swept upstate, where he's found by this young woman doctor who nurses him back to health. And it's the parallel track of both these stories, and both of them, each in their own way, struggling for sanity and just trying to figure out their future. But the Joker story, as I recall, when I first pitched it, the reason it got turned down was I guess they had just decided to do Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, and they did not want two stories coming out at the same time that were going into the Joker's psyche. So, although if you look at them, they're really very different stories.
Right.
But yeah, I'm very, very proud of that story. And Joe Staten did a beautiful, beautiful job on the artwork. And the DC collected it a few years ago, and now it's out of print again. So I really hope that it comes back into print, because it's really one of my all-time favorites out of everything I've done.
I have it. I've got a copy on my shelf in a collected edition, but I just purchased it on Comixology because they had the 75-year anniversary Batman sale. I think I spent $180. But yeah, so it's hopefully a lot of people picked it up at that point and can read it, because it's amazing. When it comes to the Joker, is it kind of abstract question, but your Joker, as you write him, of course, is he references Lou Costello and Dennis Day and
Charlie Chaplin and all that stuff. Yeah,
right. He is, no matter, people write the Joker as he exists in modern times, but somehow he's kind of frozen in that comedic. It seems like a number of people write him as a descendant of kind of the old classic comedians. Huh?
Yeah, it seemed right. I mean that he's sort of he's the subversion of the whole comedian clown thing. Because to him, life is absurd. My interpretation, life is absurd. Life is a joke. But he, in his own mind, I think he is a comedian. It's all very funny to him. He's always laughing about everything.
Right.
Right. And it made sense to me that he would probably revere these classic comedians. And then when he's when he's snapped and he's gone sane, one of the things that he's still very, very fond of is he watches old movies, he listens to old Jack Benny radio shows,
right.
And then he meets this young woman who shares his passions for these things, and they fall in love. And of course, it has a very really sad and tragic ending, but for Joker it does. For Batman, it has a very positive ending. One of the things that gets lost when people talk about that story is that it's just as important a story for Batman. One of the things I tried to bring out in that story is that a Batman is not a psychopath. So many interpretations of Batman, he has been really a borderline psycho,
right?
Really right to the edge. And this story sort of explored the idea that in his own way, he is what his father was. He is a healer. He's there, and his patient is Gotham City. Do you know what I mean? And he's not a nut job. He's someone with a tragedy in his past, and he's carrying, he's got his share of demons, but he is essentially a decent and compassionate man who is trying his best to heal the city that he loves. And that the Joker is insane, but Batman is not. And that was one of the points of that story.
Maybe that's a good segue. Of course, Batman was, at the time, arguably the only mainstream, or maybe you'll call him A-list character that appeared in the Justice League that you and Keith Giffen wrote. That stuff is maybe I don't know, but maybe your most famous work is the Justice League stuff you did.
When I go to conventions, this is the spread I seem to see is 1/3 of what I get to sign is usually Kraven's Last Hunt. 1/3 is Justice League that I did with Keith, and 1/3 is everything else.
Everything else.
A mix of all the other things from creator-owned to Marvel and DC stuff. So yeah, the Justice League stuff is also another thing that just seems to have a life of its own and live on. And happily, Keith and I, all these years later, are still working together and having a great time.
Yeah.
So Batman really was the only A-lister in there. I think in Justice League Europe, Now, even I think Wonder Woman was in there, but then I think she was gone again because no one was ever that comfortable when we got our hands on these characters. You know? and you know, the truth is, we never made fun of the characters at all. We loved those characters. We just brought a sense of humor to it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that behind the scenes, our editor Andy Helfer had to fight a lot of battles to keep Batman in that book. But we kept him, and it was nice because it allowed us to see Batman in a different light. And if he didn't come right out and make jokes, there was a playfulness to the character there where you saw that there was a lightness to him and a sense of humor that you didn't really glimpse in other places. If only him taking delight in the idiocy of the rest of the team, you know?
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, he serves as the straight man for most of it, and then
right.
And then when he made, I can't remember now, but I want to say Booster and Blue Beetle look at each other and say, "Did he just make a joke?" You know,
right? They're right. Did he just make a joke? What was it? And you were never quite sure whether was he joking or was he not. What was it? You know. But my feeling was behind it all, he was smiling the whole time at these guys. You know. Yeah, he took great delight in them.
It's it's such a delight. I mean, and it completely holds up, but it's such a delightful romp because they're, a superhero team, and they're fighting off, an alien invasion, or they're fighting off, the criminal masterminds. But that's only the background story, right. It's really the interaction between them and the silly, and it's hilarious and it's so much fun, and it's one of those books that. When you read it, thank goodness there's so much of it, but like when you're done reading it, you're not sure where to go because there's kind of nothing else like it. Mm-hmm. If you're in the mood for that, then nothing else will satisfy.
And the other thing was that to me, in a lot of ways, and I certainly have trafficked in my share of angst as a writer over the years, but those characters in a lot of ways were more real to me than these sort of psychologically angst-driven characters, because they reminded me of real people. They reminded me of me when I was a teenager or a young adult in my 20s, hanging out with my friends on a Saturday night. And the kind of goofing around that went on between friends, It was a very real overlay on the serious superhero template. So it wasn't just like, oh, we're just going to do something goofy. I thought it actually made the characters more real and more relatable. I believed in Beetle and Booster and that friendship and in that banter because it was what my own life was like with friends. So that in a lot of ways that was the great fun of that book for us. And it didn't, we didn't set out to do anything consciously. It just sort of evolved that way. Keith and Andy came up with a template. They asked me, do I want to dialogue it? I start bouncing off what Keith's doing. Keith starts bouncing off what I'm doing. And the next thing you know, these relationships between the characters evolve. And I blink, and it's 5 years later, and we've done 850,000 stories.
Yeah. How hard is it to write funny?
When it's based in the characters, it's not. I think if I had to just sit and write jokes, I used to sometimes slay, because if you remember in a lot of the Justice League stuff, we had funny credits, and I still do that a lot when Keith and I work together.
Right.
When we were just working on Larfleeze, which is a book we just did that just concluded, I would always try to get joke credits in there. I would labor over the jokes in the credits for longer than it took me to write the script sometimes, because those were just like jokes, I had to come up with some really ridiculous, goofy thing, and then sometimes Andy Helfer would rewrite my jokes, and I'd get so upset I labored over that joke for like a week. What are you talking about, Whereas the actual stories, the humor came out of the characters and their interactions, so it was a natural flow. So it did, we were writing comedy. Yes, we were. But it didn't feel like I was writing comedy. I was just writing the characters, And Keith would create some great setup or premise, or he'd have a couple of great one-liners in there that I would then build on and ricochet around with. And it just flowed naturally. So it never felt hard. It was never difficult, really. And what the amazing thing was, then we had that run and we didn't work together again really for almost 10 years. And then we did formerly known as the Justice League again with Kevin McGuire. Yeah. And it was my horror going into it was like, oh my God, what if we get together to do this again? And it just sucks. And it took about 3-4 pages, and just the rhythm came back, and everything went really, really well. And the characters start talking to each other, and off you go. And we ended up winning the Eisner for that, 10 years later, which was pretty amazing. But I've said before, my nightmare was, you see these TV reunion movies, where they get the cast of Leave It to Beaver or the Mary Tyler Moore Show back together again, and it's almost always embarrassing,
Right.
And that was my fear going into formerly known as the Justice League. But happily, it didn't play out that way. It worked just fine.
How is it, or why? How did it come to be that you worked with Keith so much?
In the beginning, it was just Andy Helfer put us together. Andy Helfer called up one day and said, "We're doing this I had just done the last 4 or 5 issues of the previous Justice League run. I wrapped it up for Andy, and he said, Keith is plotting the book. He was going to write it. Basically, Keith was more than capable of writing it, but at that point in time, he did not have the confidence to go ahead and write the book every month. So he wanted someone to come in and do the dialogue. Andy and I had worked together. It's very possible that at that point in time, Keith and I had already started work on a Dr. Fate miniseries that we were doing together also. So Keith knew me and knew my work. And going in, I was like, but Keith doesn't need me. He can do this by himself. And I really kind of hemmed and hawed and dragged my feet for the first probably 5 or 6 issues till I kind of relaxed and went, oh, my God, this is so much fun. And that's basically what happened. And I have to tell you, for those 5 years that we worked on Justice League Europe, Justice League Quarterly, not to mention the miniseries and spin-offs and all that other stuff, we had no idea that we were doing anything special. We knew the book was popular, but I never thought, Keith and I were such a great collaborators. What a great team. The book was over. We went our separate ways. I don't know. We certainly had a tremendous amount of respect and affection for each other, but we went our separate ways. It was only 10 years later when we got back to work on formerly known as the Justice League, and I'll include Kevin in this too, we went, oh my God, we really have something special here. And since then, I'd say hardly a year has gone by that I certainly haven't worked with Keith. We've done quite a few things with Kevin as well in that time, and I hope that as long as we can both still do it, we'll keep doing it. And right now, Keith and I are doing Justice League 3000 for DC and having a wonderful time on that. So it's been a great run. But it wasn't until 10 years later that the idiots kind of went, oh, this is pretty good, isn't it? This is a special collaboration. This doesn't happen with everybody. We better keep doing this.
Yeah, I wanted to, if for no other reason, just share with you. You mentioned the Dr. Fate. I had the tremendous experience of I bought that entire Dr. Fate run, the miniseries, and then the series afterwards. Mm-hmm. I bought on eBay and just had shipped to me the individual issues. Mm-hmm. And man, that was just a tremendous experience. And I'll tell you what, I read every issue. I could smell the paper. I read the ads. I read the letter column at the back, and it was so much fun, and it was such a little time capsule, But that's a really, really fun book. I don't know if you're proud of that or not, but
again, one of my all-time favorite things that I've ever done. And what was amazing about that, when first I did the miniseries with Keith, and then we launched the ongoing, which I stayed on for 2 years. Mm-hmm. And the amazing thing about it, again, looking back in retrospect, was they let me do whatever I wanted. This was a mainstream DC character, and I bent it every which way, upside down. And it became a book where I kind of was given the opportunity to say anything I wanted to say, exactly the way I want to say it. It had a level of humor and comedy like the Justice League, but it was also a very serious metaphysical exploration and a spiritual exploration and psychological. It sort of brought all the different themes of my work together in one place. And it was great. The toilet humor in one panel, and then this deep spiritual musing in the next, and then there'd be superhero adventure. Then it would be supernatural adventure, and then it would be psychological exploration, and then we'd be off into the afterlife. And I really just it was such a wonderful opportunity. And on the ongoing series, Sean McManus did the art, and Sean was the kind of artist that no matter what you gave him, he would draw it and exceed your expectations. And he just did a beautiful job on that book. And Karen Berger was the first editor, and then Art Young took over, and they just gave me all the room I needed to do whatever I wanted to do, exactly the way I wanted to do it. And I would love to see DC collect the whole thing, starting with the miniseries right through all 24 issues and the annual that we did, because also we got to tell a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It actually ended.
Yeah, I know.
You know what I mean?
I know.
So it really was like a novel, the whole thing. It really worked out beautifully. And then they basically rebooted the character after we left the book, and they went off in a whole new direction. So ours completed itself, and you rarely get a chance to do that in mainstream comics.
No, and I think a lot less nowadays too. I actually want. I don't know if you'll join me in complaining about this, but like some colleagues from my comic book club, and we've talked about this before. Something that exactly what happened in that Dr. Fate book is what almost never seems to be allowed to happen nowadays. Like prior to the New 52, my favorite books in the DC universe were the ones that kind of weren't getting paid attention to, such as Batgirl was really excellent. I think, was it Superboy or Adventure Comics or something like that. But there was a few that were not getting paid attention to. Even Doom Patrol was a lot of fun. But the books that don't get forced into participating in the company-wide crossover event, which completely derails them, for just the artificial sales bump or whatever. And you can almost feel the, writers' agony and frustration. And then, famously, right? And I don't know if you read this, but in Keith's Doom Patrol, they're gearing up for this big battle at the end, and Ambush Bug shows up and whispers into maybe Robot Man's ear or something. And he says, what the hell's the New 52? And they just stop, and that's the end of the book right there.
And that's the genius of Keith Giffen right there, yeah. Well, you said something that's actually very, very significant. You said the books that nobody's paying attention to. And one of the reasons even then that we get away with it with Dr. Fate, because it was Dr. Fate.
Exactly.
It wasn't Batman or Superman. When I first went to Marvel in 1980, and one of my first regular series there was The Defenders, which was kind of an under-the-radar book. So I basically got to, twist and turn and do whatever I wanted with it, because no one was paying attention. It's a little harder to do that. I had a lot of freedom and a lot of leeway with Spider-Man, but I saw even the difference between writing Spectacular Spider-Man to Amazing Spider-Man, which was the flagship book. Suddenly there's a little more attention on Amazing than there was in Spectacular. Where I was on Spectacular, I was allowed to go and do my stories however I wanted to do them, I still had freedom on Amazing, but not in quite the same way. So the more sort of out of the spotlight you are, I think, the easier it is to twist and bend and play and put a really individual stamp on it. But the flip side is, you can't beat working on those iconic characters. And we just were talking about going Sane. And I realized the other day when I wrote this blog post, although I've never written a monthly Batman book, I've written tons of Batman stories over the years. And in fact, they just announced yesterday at San Diego this. I've written one of these direct-to-DVD Batman animated movies called Batman vs. Robin, which will be out next year. So I'm still writing Batman stories, and nothing beats for the 12-year-old in your soul. It doesn't get more fun than writing Batman or Superman or Spider-Man, and so then there's always a way to get in there and tell a really good story. So both things kind of coexist with each other. But you're right. When you're under the radar, you can get away with murder.
I have to mention, this is one of my favorite. This might be one of my favorite comic pieces in history. Is the Metalman backup story that was published in the first 7 issues of Doom Patrol.
Right. That was, I guess, about 4 years ago or something, maybe 5 years ago.
Yeah. That was I can't think of. Not often have I laughed that hard in.
That's great because you seem to be hitting on all these stories that are really favorites of mine, which is great because I could have kept doing Metal Men for 20 years.
Oh, I wish.
I thought in a lot of ways, even more than Justice League, that was a series that so suited what we did, me and Keith and Kevin. It was just so suited to us, and I just loved it. And right when they pulled the plug, I really felt like the lens got turned and everything was crystal clear. I understood who each character was and what their bit was and what their, where they were going. And I could have just, if they would have said, okay, guys, you want to do a Metal Man Monthly? I would have signed a contract for 10 years. You know? It was really, really fun. I loved working on it. Keith's plots were brilliant. Kevin did some of his best work ever on that, and I had a blast. I had a blast working with that. Really, really wonderful, ridiculous, but yet relatable characters. And well, we had that insane story about the guy who was the science fiction actor who went crazy and thought he was really from another planet or whatever it was. I forgot what it was, but just crazy stories, and just wonderful characters. So yeah, I could have done Metal Men forever.
That was I think you introduced, was it Copper? You introduced a new Metal Men, I think.
Right. That was I think you know, she may have been. I don't know whether we introduced her or she had been introduced in some miniseries before then.
Oh, right.
But the running gag with her was that she was like such a non-entity that the rest of the team kept forgetting she was even on the team. You know?
Right. Well, she was also the most traditional superhero too, I think, on the team. Like, you know, she very much the straight man. But right, they didn't remember who she was.
Right. It was always like, you know, I'm here. I'm right here. You know? Like, who are you again? You know? Yeah, I know. That was a lot. And that was the fun. The fun for me on that was trying to go, okay, so we have these individual metal men with these very, very sort of broad personalities, but I wanted to find something unique and individual about all of them. And I forget which one it was. One of them, I decided he was the one who was completely into pop culture, and that was the way he was learning about humanity. Was, you know, he could make references to 1950s sitcoms. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Or 1940s movies, and so each one of them I was zeroing in on, and we were just having so much fun with. And I was really sad when they pulled the plug on that, because that was just a great gig. And talk about, you know, getting paid to have fun. Yeah, it was so much fun, so much fun.
On to what you're doing now, and forgive me, I'm not current, but are you still writing Phantom Stranger?
Been writing Phantom Stranger for a while. The book is coming to an end. This summer we have our final storyline. Well, I guess the last. Here's where it gets complicated. The last issue of Phantom Stranger comes out next month. Now, it's a book I started working on the book with Dan DiDio. He was plotting, I was scripting, then I took over completely, and it's just been a great run working with the wonderful artist Fernando Blanco. Very, very happy with the book. And unfortunately, you know, it's a cruel market out there. So not every these books last for 3 or 4 years or whatever it is an amazing thing given the market. And if you're not Batman, Superman, or Spider-Man, you know. So the book ends in August, and then in September is this big DC event called Future's End. So there will be a Future's End Phantom Stranger in September, which jumps the character 5 years into the future. But then happily, the month after that, I start a new book called Trinity of Sin, right, which is Phantom Stranger, The Question, and Pandora all together in a sort of supernatural team book, and that should be a lot of fun. So, because I really, really have fallen in love with the character, and it's a book that has a real spiritual dimension to it and psychological dimension to it, which is the stuff I love the most. So you get to, and I'm also, you know, I've been writing Justice League Dark as well, and the supernatural characters really allow you to get off into the more metaphysical aspects of storytelling, which I love so much, and really exploring reality from an angle that you can't when you're writing a superhero comic book. So I really, really love those characters, and I'm glad that Phantom Stranger will continue. And then over in Justice League Dark, you know, I get to just pick any character I want in the whole, you know, supernatural corner of the DC universe and play with them. You know, it's been great working on that book. And then in September, we're kicking off a whole new storyline where we're bringing in a whole bunch more characters. So it's just been really, really delightful. Really delightful.
When did you take over Justice League Dark? Because you didn't start writing it.
Oh no, I started with issue 24.
24.
Issue 24. Yeah. And now I think I just finished scripting issue 34, maybe. So about 10 issues or so. Now a big chunk of that in the middle was this massive crossover between all the supernatural books, but yeah, so I've been doing that for about 10 issues, and it's been a lot of fun. I'm also currently we're getting an annual this year too, which Klaus Janson is drawing. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then of course Giffen and I are doing Justice League 3000.
Now talk about that. What is what's that about?
Well, it's 1,000 years in the future. This much we can figure out from the title, and And it is Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, and Green Lantern as we start the book. And essentially what we learn when the book originally starts, we think they've been cloned. Which is the old cliche, it's clones, and that they have been cloned imperfectly, so that their memories are not intact. So the fun of it is we're writing the original characters. These are Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, and Green Lantern, but they're also not, because they're impaired, So we get to completely recreate them, and at the same time, they are the original characters. And what we discover as the storyline goes along, and it's, if you've never read the book, this may be a spoiler, that it's not just a question of cloning. What they found, the only way to make the process work is to find a human host. So they get a human, quote, volunteer, which we haven't gotten into the backstory yet, but you can bet that most of them probably didn't volunteer or were coerced in some way. Who are then injected with the DNA of the Justice League, which overwrites the DNA of that person. So say if it was you, you would get injected with Superman's DNA, and then you would essentially be erased and overwritten with Superman's DNA. So when our characters, they don't know this, and when they finally find out how they were reborn, it's devastating, So we have a lot of things to play with these characters. We're just still discovering them. And every month Keith throws some other wonderful twist and turn into it, and we have some stuff coming up that's just great. And even most recently, the Flash has been killed twice so far in the book. He's sort of like Kenny from South Park. And what's happened is we have another character. We have these two twins who are behind the Cadmus Project and brought the Justice League back. We call them the Wonder Twins. And one of them has just been killed, and she's been injected with the Flash's DNA. But her own personality has been retained, so now we have a new female Flash in the book, which doesn't necessarily mean that Barry Allen's not coming back in some form either. Right. So every month we've got some really, really fun stuff going on. We have I'd love to tell you what's coming, and I don't want to blow it, but we have some really, really exciting stuff coming up. But it's a really, really fun book. Howard Porter is doing the art, and he's doing just a phenomenal job of envisioning what the 31st century would look like. I mean, his landscapes, his architecture, just stuff is just amazing. And I think a lot of people, going in, maybe they were expecting our old Justice League. I don't know what they were expecting. And I think a lot of people weren't quite sure what the book was going to be. And it was, in a lot of ways, it was intentional, because you want to evolve the characters. You start them off in one place, and then they go on this journey of discovery, and they evolve, and they change. And I was just saying to Keith last week, I just finished dialoguing issue 10, and I went, oh my God, this is the issue for me where everything came together, and I see these characters becoming who they're supposed to be. So it's been a journey, and the journey will continue, because we have a lot of really, really exciting stuff coming up in months to come. So it's been a fun book, and it seems to get more fun every month.
And you have a continuing green light on that. That book is not.
Given the market, as far as we know, we're still at it. It's coming out every month. Come back and talk to me in a year and see where the sales are at, and we'll find out. The truth of the market right now is you don't know. You really don't know. It's a very, very unpredictable and dicey market, and books come out and their sales are great, and then you watch them go down every month, and then something happens, then it spikes, and then you go back up, and then you come down again. And the great thing about this Justice League book is that Keith is throwing so many interesting things into the plot that every month really, really is something different. Then I think it's the kind of thing that will sustain readers' interest. But you see every month really, really great books get canceled.
Right.
And there's nothing we can do about it. We go in and we do our best. We tell the best stories that we can, and the artists do the best work that they can. And you hope that the book lasts. And then if it doesn't, you go on to the next assignment, and that's what being a freelancer is all about, So in terms of current work, that's what I'm doing at DC these days. Those books, and I mentioned earlier I have this. I've been doing a lot of animation work for the past 10 years or so, and the next big project is this Batman versus Robin animated feature that will be out. Just announced. It should be out in March. It includes some elements from Scott Snyder's Court of Owls storyline. It's not an adaptation of that story, but we pulled some elements out of there for a backdrop to this really interesting story about Bruce and Damian Wayne and their relationship. And so I'm very excited about that. Really was a great project. I've been working with these guys at Warner Brothers Animation, as I said, for like 10 years, and they're just a fantastic group of really smart, creative people. So to work with them on these movies has just been a delight, really a delight.
Which other of those have you worked on? Those DC Animation
in terms of the shows?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did a number of episodes of Justice League Unlimited. I worked on the Legion of Superheroes show. I wrote a lot of episodes of Batman Brave and the Bold. I've worked on the new Teen Titans Go series. I got another episode of that coming up soon. And along with that, I've done, Ben 10 and Symbiotic Titan and a bunch of other things as well, Thundercats. But I've worked on a lot of what I've done has been the DC stuff. Brave and the Bold was another great one that I just loved working on that show because it was a perfect balance of sort of whimsy and serious, and it had a great flavor of fun in the old Batman from the 50s and the 60s, and yet we could turn around and do serious stories. It was just a great show, and Justice League Unlimited really has gone on to become a classic. I think it's one of the best versions of the Justice League that's ever been done in any medium. I think the movie has a lot to live up to if they can be half as good as that show was.
Yeah,
they'll be doing a good job. It was a great show, and my own episodes aside, I did maybe 7 episodes, but they did it for years, and just did Stan Berkowitz and Trey McDuffie and Alan Burnett and all those guys. Great show. So I've had a wonderful time. It's been a great gig working on those shows. And this Batman movie, this Batman versus Robin, was one of the most, because I finished the script months ago. It's just been announced, but I've been done for a while. Right. One of the most fun gigs I've ever had in any medium. It was just really a pleasure from beginning to end, and knowing the great job these guys do with the animating and the directing and all the other elements that they bring to the table. I'm sure it's going to be a terrific project.
Have you seen any of it, or
No, haven't seen a thing.
Okay.
I haven't seen a thing. Yeah. I have my script, and that's all I know.
Do they leave your script alone pretty much when they do that? You hear stories about, like in Hollywood, anyways. Someone writes a script.
Here's the thing, and I always try to be clear about this when I talk about writing for, say, television, and I've done live action television as well, and I've written for feature films as well. Although, the joke of Hollywood is you can get paid a really nice sum of money for writing a feature film that never gets made. So I've written movies and been paid for them, and they've never been made. But here's the thing about writing for TV. I put on a very different hat. Whatever the bumps and the ups and downs of comics may be these days, you still, as a writer, have tremendous freedom. Even, if you're writing Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, whatever, there's a lot of freedom to tell your story and exactly the way that you want to tell it. And what hits the page and what the reader reads is 99 and 9/10% of your intention, if not 100%, So there's a lot of room there for vision. In television, going in that it's a collaborative process. If I'm going on to write an episode of Thundercats or Justice League Unlimited or whatever it may be, it's not my show. There's a staff, there's a producer, there's a showrunner. They have a vision for how this show is going to be and what they have to do this season. I'm coming in as a freelancer, as a hired gun. So my job is to execute their vision, bring as much of myself and my passion and my particular point of view to the table, because you want to bring yourself to the table, obviously. But keeping that in mind, that it's their show and their vision that you're executing. And as long as I put on my team player hat, that I know going in the door that I'm part of the team, it's a great process. It's a really, really great process. And working on this Batman movie, especially, working with Alan Burnett and Mike Carlin and James Tucker, it was just a pleasure from beginning to end. And you'd get notes, and the notes were all great. And so instead of going, oh, God, I don't want to make these changes. Like, oh, yeah, I want to make these changes. These are great notes. And then in TV, I've seen it. Some things I've written for television, and by the time it gets on TV, it's unrecognizable. And other times, it's most of what I've written is on the screen. And you never know. And then I've written for shows where they've changed everything I've done, and then they turn around and hire me again because they tell me that they love me. and they loved working with me. And the reason why they changed everything had nothing to do with my script. It had to do with the budget for that week, or the set they needed to get, or what happened with this actor, or whatever. So you never really know. It's a crapshoot with TV in terms of what finally gets on the screen. And sometimes it's funny because it says written by so-and-so, and I go, but oh, there's a line I wrote. And other times it really is, it's exactly what I wrote or close to it, Years ago, I wrote a number of episodes for the live-action Superboy show and did a brief stint working on staff there. And that, for me, was like going to film school. And I learned a lot about, what finally makes it to the screen and why, and how the choice of this actor or this director could take a great script and destroy it, or the choice of this actor or this director can take an okay script and make it brilliant, So there's so many factors when you're dealing with TV and film. But again, for me, as long as I go in knowing that I am now not me going in with my vision, it's me part of a team, it's really a lot of fun. And you can't beat the fact that even, a low-rated television show is going to have a lot more people watching it than are reading comics. It's just the way it is, Oh, only 1 million people watch that show. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
If only 1 million people were reading every issue of every comic book I wrote, that would be an amazing thing.
And I've monopolized plenty of your time, so we don't have to go on too much longer. But if I could ask you about your take on the state of the business right now from a commercial standpoint.
On one level, I've been doing this a long time, so I have a lot to say. On another level, because I'm a freelancer and because most of what I do is me sitting behind the desk alone in a room,
Right.
I don't know what goes on behind the desks of the people that make the decisions, and I know that they're juggling a lot of issues and a lot of questions that never, ever enter into my mind or my life, So what I find interesting about the business right now is that comic books have never had more pop cultural cachet than they do right now. You know what I mean? They've never been more accepted. These movies are the biggest things going. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Of course you know what I mean. I mean, what Marvel especially has done with their movies, it's been extraordinary. That these are the biggest blockbusters ever made in some ways. Right. It's phenomenal. Has not necessarily translated into sales for the comic books. And what I see at conventions, you look around and you see the conventions every year. I don't go to a lot of them, but whenever I go, it's always like, oh, there's more people here than last year. Right. And every year it's bigger than the year before, and all these people in costumes and all this stuff. And then you suddenly realize that, wow, a lot of these people are fans of these characters because they go to the movies, or they play the video games, or they watch the animated shows. And I have to say, Marvel may be king of the films, but DC really, especially with DC animation, has really done brilliantly with their way they've translated those characters to animation. Just a great job. But there are people out there that love these characters or devote to these characters and would never in a million years pick up a comic book. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, is the single most frustrating aspect of it right now. That we've never been more popular, and yet, well, we're not that popular. It's a weird paradox. It's a really weird paradox. And I think, maybe naively, but I really believe this, that the more that digital permeates the landscape, the more of a chance that people that go to the movies that maybe in a million years, for whatever reasons, would never walk into a comic book shop or even be seen publicly reading a comic book. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'll download that to my iPad. I mean, I love that Captain America movie. Let me check out Captain America and see what's going on in the comics right now. And the easier, the more effortless, the more accessible that becomes. I think the bigger the chances that we will be pulling in those people that are huge fans of the characters, but not necessarily comic book fans. And I think once they sample our wares, they might go, "Oh, this is good stuff," Right. So, but if I had to pick my biggest frustration with the business right now, it's that we've now these characters. I shouldn't say we comics them, but the characters have never been more popular. They have never brought in more gold to Warner's Entertainment and Disney, but it doesn't necessarily translate into success in comics. And there's a lot of great work out there, both in the mainstream from Marvel and DC and creator-owned work. And you hope that those people that are fans of those movies that would then sample things digitally would then make the leap to other things beyond those characters. I've done a lot of creator-owned stuff over the years and continue to do that. And there's just wonderful stuff out there. And you see it. Apparently, it certainly translates with things like The Walking Dead. And maybe because someone once said, The Walking Dead is something that's fairly self-contained. It's not a universe. It's just The Walking Dead. So if you like the TV show and you're interested, you pick up the trade paperbacks, and it's not tied into 10,000 other things. And maybe it's a lot easier when it's a singular thing as opposed to a universe. I don't know. Because those Walking Dead trades, from what I understand, do very, very well. But for the rest of us, it hasn't really translated that well in terms of those characters. And I've never really seen very, very often over the years a huge bump when these movies come out. A big change. There might be a momentary change in the landscape. I was just talking to somebody about this. I think back in the day, like when the Batman TV show was on TV, there was a huge bump in the comics.
Yeah.
Batman was on the verge of being canceled, I think, before that show came on. Or if not being canceled, it certainly wasn't in good shape. And then suddenly it was selling 1 million copies an issue,
Mm-hmm.
But, and based on the popularity of these films, you would think Iron Man would be selling 1 million copies an issue. The Avengers would be selling 1 million copies. The Batman movie is so popular. Why isn't Batman selling, 1 million copies? But it's not translating. And just to play devil's advocate with myself, I also know we're living in a world where, for the most part, mass media has become fragmented, and it's happened to the music business. It's happened to the book business. Now everybody has their own little niche. The realm of the one entertainment that we all, we're not all watching one network anymore. We're watching 40 networks or 60 networks and Netflix and Amazon streaming.
Right.
And I think that across all media, we see things broken down in sales not what they were, or viewers not what they once were. You look at television, and a cable show could have 1.5 million viewers, a hit.
Right.
That's and yet at the same time, these Marvel movies are that. They are the thing that is bringing people together all at movie theaters. So I would just love to see these movies translate into comic book sales, and I also hope that DC has some great success with their characters as well, and gives Marvel a run for their money, because they've certainly got a great stable of characters there.
I'm in the state of Washington. Any chance we'll see you at Emerald City Comic Con in the future?
I'm always open to going to an interesting city for an interesting convention. If the convention is nice enough to invite me and fly me out and put me up, I'm there.
Sure.
I don't do them a lot. I do a couple of conventions, maybe at most every year. But I've heard so many nice things actually about the Emerald City Comic Con. So I would certainly be interested in attending.
To your point, I couldn't get this last time I went to buy tickets. I was too late. They were sold out, which in previous years was unheard of.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. It's astonishing to me. I just no matter. The Baltimore Comic Con is a very, very nice comic book friendly Comic Con.
Yeah.
And I started going there a few years back, and every year, and it was pretty mellow the first year. It was a good crowd, but every year bigger and bigger, and now they're expanding. I think to 4 days or something nuts like that.
Right.
It's really incredible, really incredible. So it's that paradox again. Comic books have never been more popular. So now, how about comic books being popular?
Right. Right.
Anyway,
where does one go to hear your music? By the way,
the one recorded CD of mine that you can actually go to my website. I have a section of my website where you could download. You can purchase and download the CD. So you can hear it there. That's the easiest. But the music is also on iTunes and a lot of other places out there. And I've been threatening to go back into the studio and do another CD for about 10 years now. And I've got so many songs waiting to be recorded. So one of these days, and soon I hope, I want to get back in and do that again, because even though I've been a professional writer now for all these years, in my heart and soul I remain, I think, first and foremost a musician.
Sure.
So it brings me great joy to do music. All right. Well, we talked a long time. Holy Moses.
Well, you're easy to talk to. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure's mine. We'll talk to you again.
And I'll be happy to do it again, 6 months or a year down the line. For sure.
Outstanding. Thanks so much, James.
Thanks, Jeff. Have a good day. Bye.
You too. Well, we definitely want to thank you for listening to today's interview. We want to thank JM for being generous with his time. The works that JM was talking about will be linked to on our website. Also, at our website, you can find a number of other interviews we've conducted and some of our roundtable style discussions. If you think about us, follow us on Facebook or Twitter. Give us a rating on iTunes. Tell a friend, and most importantly, come visit us again soon. Thanks very much.